friends. This is Wheezy from the What is True podcast. Hope everyone is doing rather exquisite. This is a small clip, and if you fancy listening to the entire episode, please visit the link tree below. This is due to the heavy censorship on this particular platform, so I hope you guys understand and hope to catch you on these other platforms. Much love. Podcast, happy Sunday to everyone. I am super excited. I am joined by Vanessa Beeley. I've been trying to have her on for quite some time, so it's it's a special little treat today. Thank you, Vanessa, for joining us today.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have been an independent journalist, photographer. You have been in Syria for a few years now. When was it? A couple of weeks ago, there was some big talk that unless you're in the area, you shouldn't really have an opinion. Well, you have been there. You've been living there, right in the war zone. And I'm super excited to get your on the boots on the ground reporting. But for those that may have or may now just be hearing about you for the first time, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I got into journalism through, through activism. I was in Gaza in 2012 for the Israeli aggression then. I entered through the tunnel, so I had no way of leaving. Not that I would have left anyway, despite the ongoing aggression. I went back in 2013 to Gaza, and then started to pick up on some of the narratives on Syria, and for various reasons was alerted to the fact that this was another regime change war. I joined a couple of organizations that were standing in solidarity with Syria, and then finally got to Syria in 2016 as part of an American peace delegation. Actually, I was the only Brit on the delegation of about 12 people. Organized by the US Peace Council. We met with President Assad and with a number of opposition leaders and faith leaders inside Syria, and then kind of the rest is history. So then from November, December 2016, I was on the front lines as the city of Aleppo in the north of Syria was being liberated from the various Takfiri factions dominated by Al-Qaeda. And then basically I was going back to Syria every couple of months until 2019, when I actually moved there, and I lived there for the next 5 years until, of course, Damascus fell. And I was there when it fell, and I was there for the last few days in December 2024, and the West finally got its regime change project in Syria.
Beautiful. Well, not so beautiful. Devastating stuff definitely going on in the Middle East. I first came across your work, I believe, through James Corbett's work on the white helmets, and he used quite a bit of your work for his project. And I think especially now, have you ever heard of David McGowan?
David, I'm not sure. I know Stephen McGowan or Stephen Gowan. Sorry, I get very mixed up with names generally.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, David McGowan passed away about 10 years ago, and he was a journalist that investigated, super investigative work, and he covered a lot of events that were passed off as real, and then he's like, this is manufactured, this is fake. And one of those events was in 2013, the Boston Marathon bombing. He showed through photographic evidence that the whole thing was manufactured. It wasn't how it was passed in the media as some mass casualty event. And oddly enough, his Wikipedia doesn't really tarnish him as Wikipedia has done with you, for example. I had a good time reading your Wikipedia, I think this morning, where they throw these ad hominem attacks on you, but they don't provide any evidence It's just pure attacks, which I found funny. But David McGowan has been an inspiration for me for the last few years in the way I see reality. You know, what gets passed off as reality. Uh, so many of these events are indeed manufactured, and so I remember seeing your work on the white helmets a few years back, and I thought that was a huge eye opener. You know, we constantly get told, and it's hard for us. You know, I'm out here in Florida. We see images on TV. We, you know, really our only outlet is these mainstream rags. And so if we don't know any better, we have to take whatever we see on our TV or read on our newspapers as quote unquote fact. And then comes someone like you, an independent journalist, who says, wait a minute, this isn't how nothing like what you guys, the mainstream, is portraying it to be. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to get reach out to you chiefly, was if we could go over a little bit of your white helmets research, or as deep as you want to go in it, because it's been a few years since you know, that has happened, and I think maybe some people have memory hold it, or maybe some people have never even heard of it. If you don't mind, if we can discuss some of your work there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to some degree, it has been memory hold, and I think, unfortunately, also with the rapid normalization of what is effectively an Al Qaeda Takfiri project, government, or unelected regime now in Syria after the fall of Damascus and the flight of former President Assad to Russia. People are kind of, I won't say moving on, but the people that are now coming into the Syria story are perceiving this as, well, you know, our government has normalized them. We're lifting sanctions, so everything must be okay now, right? And the white helmets are still there. They've basically been put in charge of countrywide rescue and emergency services, while, of course, this government is conducting ethnic cleansing along sectarian lines against Syrian minorities, including Alawites, Christians, any factions basically that don't comply with dark age extremist Islamic ideology. Which is effectively represented by Al Qaeda and ISIS, who, by the way, collaborated for much of the time inside Syria, and are both proxies of the West, particularly the US in Syria. And so the White Helmets was an organization or a concept that was developed in Turkey by a former British military intelligence officer. The UK was the primary sponsor of the organization and the primary investor in the organization, but along with the CIA or USAID, which is pretty much the same thing, and the Gulf countries, in particular Qatar, which supports the Muslim Brotherhood organization that has been used or weaponized against Syria for decades, since 1946 onwards. And so this organization was created by these intelligence agencies, funded by those that had a publicly declared interest in the overthrow of the Syrian government, and they were embedded with the terrorist groups inside Syria. So they didn't work alongside any government organizations. They worked only alongside Al Qaeda. And basically, they were there to corroborate Western regimes' foreign policy in Syria, which is regime change. So they were responsible from 2013 onwards for the staging of and the narrative surrounding the alleged chemical weapon attacks that have now been entirely discredited by a number of researchers and independent investigative analysts, especially the 2018 Damascus attack in Douma, which allegedly happened in April 2018 when I was actually in Damascus towards the end of the liberation of the Damascus suburbs from various terrorist factions. And in that case, of course, it was actually the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, their own inspectors, who went to the ground and did the investigation, in the end contradicted the final OPCW report and declared it sort of null and void because it didn't represent their own investigation. And that's an ongoing saga, really, in the sense that those inspectors have been silenced both at the UN and within the OPCW and prevented from showing the evidence that showed quite clearly that the Syrian government hadn't used chemical weapons in that instant. And there is, as I said, documented and archived evidence that the Syrian government didn't use chemical weapons against its own civilians as claimed by the White Helmets, and then, of course, used by the UN to criminalize the Syrian government. The White Helmets also stand accused by the Syrian people of crimes against those people, including organ trafficking, including child abduction, those children then used in the staged chemical weapon events, theft, murder, working alongside the armed groups to basically steal homes from people and enable the settlement of the Al-Qaeda dominated terrorist factions. All of that evidence, again, is documented. There was a Russian UN panel that I participated in at the UN at the end of 2017, which outlined a very in-depth investigation carried out by the Foundation for the Study of Democracy into the organ trafficking claims. And I myself have spoken to a couple of very high-level UN commissioners who were focused on Syria at the time, and who told me that, yes, it's very likely the White Helmets are involved in these kind of crimes, but that it will never be investigated because they're a political asset for those countries that are trying to destabilize Syria. So that came directly from people involved in the Syria file for years. So basically, I guess my reasoning, I kind of like the title of your show, What Truth? I guess I try to present the facts based on testimony from the people inside the countries that are under attack. Very often, I actually don't share testimony until I can put the meat on the bones, until I can actually pull together the evidence to corroborate whatever testimony I was given. So I don't put testimony out blank like that and take it as the truth. I try my best to pin fact to those testimonials and to those accounts in order to bring the evidence as close as possible to whatever truth is, and removing as much of my own opinion. Although I have very strong opinions, I'm very biased against colonialism, against imperialism,